Today, we are taught that the theory of evolution came from Darwin. But did it really? It appears that the writings of Diodorus Siculus gives a pretty good description of the theory of evolution. In Wikipedia, it also notes that several Greek scholars, including Lucretius, also may have contributed to the theory. Now, a lot of people debate evolution. It's tough for them to understand how things can just change, and people, have come up with different theories. But as I've said before, in some of my research, just one gene mutation can change the human body dramatically. It could create dwarfism or gigantism, and many other different things could happen. So I don't think anybody really truly knows how things got here. I definitely don't think the Earth is 6,000 years old. But it is clear that a lot of different life forms have come and gone. And there's a good point of why aren't things changing today? Well, the question is, why would they? We don't understand how long it takes for things to truly change. What would happen? Something chemically that would mutate genes, or some kind of a common hit? We don't know. But anyway, let's just read here from Diodorus Siculus's Library of History. And he says there are different groups that take the position that the universe did not come into being and will not decay. It has declared that the race of men also has existed from eternity. There having never been a time when men were first begotten. The other group, however, which holds that the universe came into being and will decay, has declared that, like it, men had their first origin at a definite time. When in the beginning, as their account runs, the universe was being formed, both heaven and earth were indistinguishable in appearance, since their elements were intermingled. Then, when their bodies separated from one another, the universe took on all its parts. The ordered form in which it is now seen, the air set up a continual motion, and the fiery element in it gathered into the highest regions. Since anything of such a nature moves upward by reason of its lightness, and it is for this reason that the sun and the multitude of other stars became involved in the universal whirl, while all that was mud-like and thick and contained an admixture of moisture sank because of its weight into one place, and as this continually turned about upon itself and became compressed, out of the wet it formed the sea, and out of what was firmer the land, which was like potter's clay and entirely soft. But as the sun's fire shone upon the land, at first all became firm, and then, since its surface was in a ferment, because of the warmth, portions of the wet swelled up in masses in many places, and in these pustules, covered with delicate membranes, made their appearances. Such a phenomenon can be seen yet in swamps and marshy places. Whenever the ground having become cold, the air suddenly and without any gradual change becomes intensely warm. And while the wet was being impregnated with life by reason of the warmth in the manner described, by night the living things forthwith received their nourishment from the mist that fell from the enveloping air, and by day were made solid by the intense heat. And finally, when the embryos had attained their full development, and membranes had been thoroughly heated and broken open, there was produced every form of animal life. Of these, such had partaken of the most warmth, set off to the higher regions, having become winged, and such as retained an earthly consistency came to be numbered in the class of creeping things, and of the other land animals, while those whose composition partook the most of the wet element gathered into the region congenial to them, receiving the nature of water animals. And since the earth constantly grew more solid through the action of the sun's fire and of the winds, it was finally no longer able to generate any of the larger animals, but each kind of living creatures was now begotten by breeding with one another. And apparently Euripides also, who was a pupil of Anaxagoras, the natural philosopher, is not opposed to the account of the nature of the universe, for in his Melanip he wrote as follows: "'Tis thus that heaven and earth were once one form, but since the two were sundered each from each, they now beget and bring to light all things, the trees and birds, the beasts, the spawn of sea, the race of mortals. Concerning the first generation of the universe, this is the account which we have received. But the first men to be born, they say, led an undisciplined and bestial life, setting out one by one to secure their sustenance and taking for their food both the tenderest herbs and the fruits of wild trees. Then, since they were attacked by the wild beast, they came to each other's aid, being instructed by expediency, and when gathered together in this way, by reason of their fare, they gradually came to recognize their mutual characteristics. And, and though the sounds which they made were at first unintelligible and indistinct, yet gradually they came to give one another upon symbols for each thing which presented itself to them, made known among themselves the significance which was to be attached to each term. But since groups of this kind arose over every part of the inhabited world, not all men had the same language, inasmuch as every group organized the elements of its speech by mere chance. This is the explanation of the present existence of every conceivable kind of language, and furthermore, out of the first groups to be formed came all the original nations of the world. Now the first men, since none of these things useful for life had yet discovered, led a wretched existence, having no clothing to cover them, knowing not the use of dwelling in fire, and also being totally ignorant of cultivated food. For since they also even neglected the harvesting of wild food, they laid by no store of its fruits against their needs. Consequently, large numbers of them perished. Large numbers of them perished in the winters because of the cold and lack of food. Little by little, however, experience taught them both to take to the caves in winter and to store such fruits as could be preserved. And when they had become acquainted with fire and other useful things, the arts also, and whatever else is capable of furthering man's social life, they were gradually discovered. Indeed, speaking generally in all things, it was necessity itself that became man's teacher, supplying in appropriate fashion instruction in every matter to a creature which was well endowed by nature and had, as its assistants for every purpose, hands and speech and sagacity of mind. And as regards to the first origin of men and their earliest manner of life, we shall be satisfied with what has been said, since we would keep due proportion in our account. But as regards all events which have been handed down to memory and took place in the known regions of the inhabited world, we shall now undertake to give a full account of them. So he continues on, and he talks about the first kings and the antiquity of the human race. He states that the Greeks were autochtons. That means they're natural to the area. They were there first. They were always there, part of that area. And he says the first people were the barbarians, and but yet not considering them earlier than the Greeks. So it continues on and talks a little bit more, but basically this is and it goes into the flood of Deculon and then the people of Egypt. Um, this is basically evolution, and as I said, this comes out of the Loeb Library, and that's out of Harvard, and it's kept for the elite. And the average person doesn't have access to these books. You know, that hundreds of them, probably worth thousands of them. They, out of that Library of Alexandria, and they destroy them or remove them from the public. But for sure, this is very similar to some of the thoughts in evolution, and probably where some of these so-called geniuses of the 19th century and 20th century got some of their ideas. That's it.